The autumn sky above Lone Mesa in West Texas burned in shades of orange and crimson as dusk settled across the plains. In a small log cabin on the rim of the mesa, Rachel Garrett crouched by the hearth, coaxing a weak fire into life. She wore her late husband's flannel coat against the biting wind, her hands raw from splitting wood that morning. The silence of the evening was broken by a knock at her door, sharp, frantic, and unfamiliar. She froze, heart pounding, one hand reaching for the rifle by the door. A second knock came, harder, followed by a voice, hoarse and pleading, "Please, milk, my son. He is dying." Rachel unbarred the door. Standing on the porch was a tall Apache warrior, his shoulders broad, his hair tied back with leather. In his arms lay a baby swaddled in a thin, filthy blanket so weak he barely breathed. Across the field, a group of townsfolk watched with lanterns in hand, whispering fearfully, "Don't let him in. It's an Apache." Rachel's eyes stayed on the child. His ribs showed beneath the cloth, his lips cracked with thirst. She stepped forward and held out her arms. "Give him to me," she said. The man hesitated, then handed the boy over with such tenderness it nearly broke her heart. Inside, Rachel sat by the fire, loosened her blouse, and guided the baby's mouth to her breast. At first his lips fumbled, then he latched, sucking weakly but desperately. Tears welled in her eyes as his tiny hands twitched against her. The warrior knelt silently by the door, exhaustion etched into his face, a crusted wound darkening his collarbone. His voice was low, almost reverent. "You saved him. You saved us." Rachel asked the child's name. The warrior whispered, "Alan Nanton." Then, after a pause, he added, "But his mother called him Taklisham. We have not spoken that name since her death." Rachel only nodded, rocking the boy gently as the townsfolk muttered outside. Finally, she stepped to the door, holding the baby close, and told them firmly, "He is just a child. No one starves on my porch." That night, the warrior removed a feather from the cord around his neck. A red-tailed hawk, symbol of protection in his people's tradition. He gave it to her with solemn respect. Rachel set it beside the child and said softly, "I don't know what this means." He answered, "Neither do I. But he is breathing." From that moment, a fragile bond began. Each morning afterward, the warrior returned with the baby. Rachel named him Nathaniel, saying it meant, "Gift of God." She fed him, cradled him, and watched his strength return. The man, Ilan, never crossed her threshold without invitation, but his silent presence lingered outside the cabin at night, watching over them. One morning, Rachel found a cedar carving left beside the cradle, a tiny horse etched with careful hands, its belly inscribed with the words, "So he will remember his courage always." When she showed it to Ellen, he explained, "The horse's freedom, strength. Our people ride with the sky. My son must know that even if he grows among yours." That evening, she finally welcomed him inside. They sat by the fire, saying little, but understanding much. Days stretched into weeks. Rachel shared her grief for her lost child, Elijah. Elan shared the embroidered cloth his wife had made before she died, protecting their son. Their sorrows wove together, unspoken yet deeply understood, but whispers grew in town. Some accused Rachel of betrayal for nursing an Apache child. One evening, 6 armed men confronted her porch. Rachel stood barefoot, Nathaniel in her arms, and when they shouted that the baby was not one of them, she calmly brought him to her breast before their eyes. "This child is not your enemy," she told them. Their rage faltered into silence. Then Miriam Quinn, widow of the town's preacher, stepped forward with a pot of chicken stew. "Feed him," she said firmly. "That's what mothers do." The men left, But the threat lingered. Days later, Amos Dillard returned with his gang, demanding Rachel hand over the warrior and the child. Elan stood between her and the men, unarmed but unyielding. When one lunged for the doorway, Elan caught his wrist and forced him to his knees. His voice was low but resolute. "You do not own this child. She is his mother, and I am his father." Rachel's heart ached at the truth in those words. Together, they chose courage over fear. But danger returned again when Amos ambushed them near the creek. Before violence could spill, Reverend Clay and a federal marshal intervened, declaring Rachel, Elan, and Nathaniel under protection of the law. Defeated, Amos retreated, leaving behind a promise of revenge. Seasons passed. Rachel's cabin grew into a home filled with laughter and learning. She taught children from both settler and Apache families. Elan carved cradles, beams, and furniture, his warrior's hands reshaping into a craftsman's. Nathaniel toddled about the garden, his world rooted in both traditions. One evening, under lanterns strung between trees, Elan knelt before Rachel with a silver ring etched in Apache words. "Will you live with me?" he asked softly, not as mine, but as my equal. Tears filled her eyes as she answered, "I am already home." Their wedding was simple yet profound. Beadwork on Rachel's dress, a sash of Elan's tribal symbols, and wild flowers braided into her hair. They joined hands under the arch of vines, lanterns rising into the Texas night like stars pulled down to witness. Later, inside the cabin, Elan carved their names into the beam above the hearth. Rachel Nanton, Nathaniel. The home, the land, the very wood itself, now remembered. No longer strangers, no longer divided, but bound by choice, by love, and by the courage to stand against fear. And so, under the endless sky of Lone Mesa, a widow, a warrior, and a child formed a family. Not through blood, but through hope, sacrifice, and the firelight of love that no storm could ever extinguish.